Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to some more Warforge content. And I really enjoyed putting out a video at the end of last season and kind of doing some reflections and just being, happy that I was able to make it on the leaderboard that first time. And we were able to do it a second time, though I will say this was the most stressed I've been about getting on the leaderboard. I feel like everyone was grinding this season, and the fact that congrats to Pudis, which is just such a funny name to say, who uh, went I think to 4,600, which is definitely one of the higher point ranges I think for first place. I mean, and I think it was Barrick and Space Marine, and all of them were up there, 4.2k plus. So it was just kind of a crazy season for Warforge, and I think we just saw also more competition, more people playing for the leaderboard, which is great. That's what I want to see. I would love for there to be more of that because I will tell you, the grind was tough when I was playing against people that I had plus 1k rating over, right? So I'm gonna get pretty much the same rating from winning against a player as I am a bot. And so that kind of experience was a little nerve wracking because it just meant if I ever hit a loss, that was like minus 20, minus 25, and then each win was going to be 7, 8 points. So I really had to kind of grind it out there, and hopefully you checked out my Eldar video. It's got it in the background here, which really allowed me, I think, just to grind a bit faster and take advantage of some of the people like just learning the Tau decks, and maybe just not playing against Eldar or like a more of an aggressive option, that often. So, and I feel like this is a good motivation for me. I hope to bring you a video like this at the end of each season, probably even if I don't make top 50. It takes a lot of time and effort. Usually I get, lower motivation, but these last couple of days I really was hitting it. So I felt like there was a lot of reason to just try a bit harder this season, and I think this is the highest point range. Or no, maybe I hit 38 something. All right. Well, either way, still feels good to have made it into the top 40, I guess. So thanks for being with me, and as always, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the little bell to get the reminder. I've been really trying to keep up the consistent content. We have some exciting things coming very, very soon. But before we do that, I wanted to have a reflective video on season 4. Just kind of what are the lessons learned. What am I maybe hoping to achieve, in the first week of the season before we see balance changes? What do I maybe think the balance changes should target from my perspective? And so I kind of wanted to just go through what are some of the decks that showed up, why they showed up, why they may be falling back or kind of surging ahead. So feel free to stick with me here if that's something you're interested in, and maybe we'll try and do some more videos like this that, yes, are talking about meta, but are also kind of talking about the future of Warpforge and kind of what we would like to see for competitive, because I think we're seeing more players really grinding it out, which just makes the game feel all the more worthwhile when you're really competing. So oh, of course. I think this is the second legendary now because you get one. I got one from last season that I totally have. But I guess maybe throwing this into the forge will be good for when we get the reinforcement drop for the Ultramarines. Can't wait for that. The Ultramarines need some love. So yeah, so we're starting back down again here at 2,500, and got 34 days. Okay, yeah, so it's a little bit of a, it feels like a longer season. Maybe that's not the case. All right, so let's talk about early season, what was happening. Now, and also take my deck list with a grain of salt here. It's more for us to have something to kind of look at and talk about. So Turvagon, I think it was no secret that this deck really benefited from the buffs to Tyranids, and specifically to Turvagon himself with the card going to 0, and was kind of the menace of the format for like 2 weeks straight, at least. I think there were a lot of us, myself, BJ, and Ecclesiarch included, who were like, Orks are still on top. They were good at the end of last season. They're probably going to be good now. and we'll talk a little bit more about them. But definitely, Turvagon felt like the just thing to be on the lookout for, and that there's not a lot of that you can do, right? When it combos off, it combos off. And because there wasn't like a really clear dedicated aggressive deck, because Ultramarines did, or at least Uriel received that nerf, and it definitely did affect their ability to kind of close out consistently. And the buffs to Turvagon just kind of made this deck pop up, and it was tough. I'm not going to say it was the funnest to play into. It's probably the first thing that pushed me more towards the Orks, because as long as they're not comboing, before I can get Will of Gork or potentially even disrupt what they're doing with no mucking about or whatever it is, it really pushed me towards that pretty early in the format. I do think where we're at now, not to jump too far ahead here, is that Tau as a whole really shut down Tyranids. And even specifically this deck, because of the sheer amount of Vanguard units they can produce, right? What Tyranids are trying to do, and specifically with Turvagon, is swarm the board with, basically impossible to clear units. However, when you have a million Vanguard units, and you can just kind of like keep those going, not to mention obviously experimental. Oh, now I'm blanking on the cards, but it's the experimental drones, of course. There's just so much that you get to throw out there, and because you really only have access to things like, Toxic Entanglement, you can't really use on that many drones. You've got Moloch to maybe clear the way. You've got, Rapacious Hunger that'll kind of help you out. But, Tyranids don't really have a way to deal with the sheer amount of bodies that Tau can put out. I haven't played this matchup all that much, but I just think that it's a huge mismatch, and it's probably with the resurgence of the introduction of the Tau, I should say, in the, I guess, like third week of the season, I think pretty much most of the Tyranids fell away. Although I think a lot of people have shared that they had really high win rates early on. I just imagine that pretty much every Tyranid Warlord is kind of hurting now into the Tau matchup. Now, everything else they probably are doing fine with. But with the introduction of Tau, and people are going to be playing it, obviously, because it's the newest thing on the block, I think the Tyranids are not in the worst place, because I think that's where Necrons are. But I think just having a faction that seems like it may just kind of hard counter them, I think it puts them in a rough spot, at least for the foreseeable future. So I don't want to say like RIP Tyranids or Turvagon players quite yet, because it definitely could be proven wrong, and maybe there are some innovations, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those lessons that I learned in this format for Season 4. But I think we may see less and less of Turvagon here. So that kind of brings us to... let's just talk about the Tau. And I haven't updated this deck quite yet from my playtesting, but feel free to take a look. So Tau were introduced in, I guess, the third week of the season, and that kind of upended a lot of things. Everyone was kind of rushing to build it. I think I really only played it on ladder for the first time a couple of days ago, actually, and had a lot of fun, and definitely saw the strength. And I think Barrick was using an aun'va build to climb with. I think I countered him a couple times. I'm sure there were plenty of other players as well. And they're the real deal. They certainly are powerful, if not, calling for nerfs almost immediately about some of the drone synergies. I'm still going back and forth on, okay, yeah, it feels terrible to lose to a high roll Tau, game. How consistently can they do that? I do think that kind of, just in direct comparison with certain cards, that Tau just like have a bit of a bump. They just like their overall power level is a bit higher than a lot of different cards in different factions. I still think it's very beatable. I feel like Eldar actually have quite a good matchup into them, at least with the version that I've been running. But I do think that they're here to stay. And I think that they really shut down Tyranids, which were very popular in the early season. So I think that's why they've kind of fallen away. I also think that Tau have some really good late game capabilities. Now, I still don't know if anything is quite competing with what the Orks can do, But I think aun'va specifically having access to, if I play a board that's reasonably sized from my, companion cards, right? Like Piranha, potentially like other ones too, but even the Enforcer battle suits, um, that if you don't answer it, then I'm going to Storm of Fire and kill you. I think that aun'va has that kind of threat where I have played games on the Orc side of it, and maybe, there's a little bit of variance, of course, because it's a card game, but it felt like it was hard to keep up with the amount of threats that aun'va can, or the Tau can throw out, and then aun'va can buff, and the sheer kind of raw card advantage that aun'va has. I still think Shadow Sun and Omysos are pretty strong, and probably will find their way into the format a little bit more reliably once the builds are a little bit more fleshed out. But I think aun'va has just continued to impress me above both of them, specifically because of the way that they can play into Orks, which kind of brings us to our kind of last stop in the reflection. But before I get to them, I would encourage people to probably play test the most with aun'va. I do think he's probably going to have the most success, but come at me in the comments. Let me know what you're doing with your Tau builds, and if you feel the same about him. I just think that he kind of breaks the mold of what the game has established when you can draw cards that are not ephemeral, and you're able to just have a lot of different lines of play and flexibility and kind of inevitability, right? Because as you drain your opponent of resources, all it takes really is 1 or 2 turns of being able to buff your units. And by units, I mean one card that you play that then spawns several drones, right? So it's just the card advantage is across the board really incredible with this kind of build. So if you didn't catch my Tau builds video, feel free to go check that out. Those were all the decks that I kind of arrived at after like 5 hours of streaming and messing around. So I still want to really deep dive, and I think we'll be getting some Tau videos out that are a little bit more fleshed out in the very near future. So I'm looking forward to that. So that brings me to what I think is the strongest faction in the format currently, and likely one of the strongest builds. And that is just kind of full control Gaskell. I think you can play other Orc Warlords. I really wouldn't fault you necessarily because they do have some advantages. I've been thinking more about Zagstruck for being able to deal with drones, is kind of pretty well positioned in certain ways. But I think what Gaskell always brings is the fact that he can, still make a body that you're going to clear, but also can turn on the heat when he needs to, buff that Warbiker plus a Makari to hit you for, 6 damage out of nowhere. So, I think that Gaskell just probably is the end-all be-all when it comes to Orks. And really the thing that I have been mostly an advocate for in the feedback or balance channel of the Discord is I think we need to do something about Will of Gork. I think there are arguments for why Rock Invasion feels absolutely busted. I think there are reasons for why Grizzled Scarboy may be a card that we need to look at. But it just seems like after reinforcements, after some deck building, and there's been some innovations. One I'll kind of mention here that I had sort of thrown out. I'm sure other players had played it or tried it too. Was Stormboy Strike. I was like, well, what if we just play an extra card that essentially builds a board, right? That was really not seeing any play previously because the format's so slow. And because you can catch someone on a turn where you basically just get all this card advantage building a board. And then you can buff it when you're playing Gaskell. So and I think there's some other builds that Putis had talked about. Of course, this is like pretty much straight from the Ecclesiarch who, I think really put Crump to Gits more on the map. This faction and this particular build just has so much ability to like kind of make everyone play to what they're doing. To me, Orks have been the boogeyman of the format now for quite a bit, and this particular kind of hard control shell is just really, really hard to compete with. I think aun'va actually has a bit of a shot, and I do really want to test once we smooth out the Tau builds, if they are able to really compete, kind of for that top spot against Gaskell. But I think if you want to do well, I just think that Orks are where it's at. And the reason I'm kind of calling for some adaptation around Will of Gork, and I don't even have Prophet of Wa in here, which essentially means that you have 3 chances of drawing Will of Gork, right? Is just the fact that this deck just you have to play aggressively into it, or you have to go over the top of it, right? And it's still a really tough matchup for Eldar. I think it is winnable, but that's probably the best aggro deck in the format, in my opinion. Since Ultramarines, can't. I don't think they can really address what's going on overall in the format, and I don't think they're as good of an aggressive option anymore. It's just sad to say, but I think we got to live in reality, and we're living in Gaskell and really the Orks world, revolving around Will of Gork and revolving around Rock Invasion. Now, Rock Invasion I have less of an issue with, even though, of course, it can be a board, build a board and wipe their board, right? If you hit your Ork knob in the Rock Invasion, or you even hold it till turn 14, 14 energy, which is not that hard to do with Gaskell control and the amount of life gain that the deck has and the armor that it gets. The thing is, I would expect a 10 energy card to be strong and to not be win on the spot, but get pretty close, right? Because it's 10 energy. And even in a slow format, I think there are ways that you can deal with this. But the trick is a lot of factions can't. And the other thing is you have to play around Will of Gork. And this costs 7 energy, and you have 3 chances to get it if you include Prophet of Wa. And the fact that they also have premium removal in no mucking about, and the sheer amount of flankers just means that they can pretty much turn for turn answer exactly what you're doing. And then you also have to play through a board wipe, right? Which doesn't care about shields, doesn't care about camouflage. All the things that every other faction has to play around with damage-based removal and things like that, even including the Tau, right? With Marker Light and Fusillade and all of that. Will of Gork does not care. Yes, it affects your board too, but that just doesn't matter when we're living in a control world. So I don't know if the fix is Will of Gork being legendary, right? And so you can still play Prophet of Wa. You essentially can still have a chance of drawing it, twice. But you don't have to play around 2 Will of Gorks on top of everything else. Is that the solution? I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. I think Will of Gork, to me, is probably the most kind of format warping card currently. And then Grizzled Scarboy, I also think, is just such an incredible staple in this deck. So I don't know if both of the cards need to be touched, or maybe some of the flankers have their stats adjusted, right? Maybe lowering their health, lowering their attack stats so they can't clear as easily, so that it's less punishing to try and develop your board early or actually play a tempo-based game. Or maybe this all just feels overpowered because there's just no good aggressive option in the format. Now, I got my hands on Vardengast, the Terra Vardengast recently. It was in the shop, and I really want to try and make that thing work. I think it can be incredibly explosive, but I don't know if it's reliable, and I don't know that it can deal with things in the format that provide the Vanguard, just kind of proliferation that the Tau have. So it just feels like this is the deck, and everyone else is playing, has to conform to what the Orks game plan is. And that happens, right? But I think Orks have just kind of always been strong. And it's funny, I think Tau got the bad rap because they were oh, they're released and they're overpowered and blah, blah, blah. But I think secretly the whole time, Gaskell was just waiting to be oh, you think you can, you have the highest power and that you can address all the format's concerns? Orks have been doing that for seasons, right? For all 4 seasons, maybe. So, I'm interested to see what people think. This is, of course, coming from my perspective, playing the ladder, playing the games that I've played. on the ladder this season, last season, because I was playing Gaskell last season as well, and I played it a bit at the beginning of this season. I couldn't take the length of games. I'm not really good with control strategies anyway. I think I'm a better aggro player, or mid-range player, but it was fun for a bit. It was good for a bit, and then when I started seeing mirror matchups, and other things like that, I was like, no, I don't think I can play the ladder like this. So I do think that the win rate is really solid on this deck, and I think that it is kind of the terror of the format at this point. But we'll see what the balance changes bring. And I would be happy to see some adjustment either to kind of the raw power of some of their flank units, right? Whether that's like Orc Knob or even like the Squig Buggy, which can be really hard to play around, or Storm Boy potentially. Maybe we don't need to touch Will of Gork or Rock Invasion or Grizzled Scarboy. I would advocate personally for something around Will of Gork or Scarboy. Like maybe Will of Gork costs 8, right? Instead, I do think even a turn difference could make a bit of a difference. Maybe not. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is that I think if you were to ask me what a tier list of kind of factions is right now and the best decks, I think Orks are on top. I think Tau are, somewhat close behind, but definitely behind. And then I think Necrons are kind of on the lower end, but maybe there's a Necron control build. And this is where I wanted to talk about innovations, like not even just cards like Stormboy Strike, but, I wonder if maybe Dreadnoughts, and some sort of full control Calgar build could compete. I don't know. I don't know that all the kind of counter control options have been explored, and it, there are even different Gaskell builds to win the mirror match. It's kind of like these control decks kind of are having to like morph and find more iterations. And maybe when that happens, aggro can come back, because as control decks get greedier and greedier to beat other control decks, aggro might have a resurgence. So this is why meta is so interesting, metagaming, because it's all about who's responding to what at what time, which allows for different strategies to emerge. But I will say, I think the speed of the format right now is rather slow. And as much as people sometimes complain about aggro decks, they do keep stuff like this in check. So it's not that I always want aggro to be kind of the premier strategy in each format, but I would like for there to be aggressive options that feel pretty competitive. Is kind of where I would land with that. So I think we'll close it out there, probably long enough, even just for a reflection video, but I thought I'd share some of my thoughts on the season and kind of the meta and all of that good stuff. And I know I'm going to be busy coming up, just to kind of give a warning out there, so we might not have quite as much content as I've been able to be putting out, but we definitely got some exciting stuff coming up with perks that we're adding to the channel, with membership and kind of how that works. But I'll do a whole separate video on that. But get hyped for that. Let me know how things are going for you, what you're looking forward to in Season 5, what you'd like to see from me in Season 5, just to kind of wrap up there. I did put a poll up, just kind of judging what factions people would want to see. No, the Necrons are not on there, because I haven't actually touched their campaign yet. But I think now that I have most of what I want from the Tau, I'll probably start working on that too. So as always, thanks for sticking with me and checking things out, and I will catch you next time.